Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another session. And this time we're going to talk about Paul of Tarsus, who played a major role and arguably to be the founder of Christianity. And I have my two beloved brothers here, Brother Tay
Assalamu alaikum.
and Brother Idriss.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. So, let's go on to it, inshallah. So, Paul of Tarsus, just to give you a little bit introduction, it's believed that out of 27 books of the New Testament, nearly half of the New Testament corpus is allegedly attributed back to Paul. So you have 13 letters of Paul, but textual critics of today, critical scholars, say that we can only authenticate 7 out of those 13 letters. So 6 of them are what they call pseudepigrapha. So somebody forged these letters in the name of Paul to propagate his theology and his doctrinal belief. Amongst the authentic letters are Galatians, Corinthians, etc. And those that are forged letters are like Titus, First Timothy, Hebrews, etc. Yeah. So if we want to talk about Paul, it's reasonable to start off with letters that were actually written by Paul. Yeah. So all of our thesis based of Paul will be based upon letters that are attributed back to Paul. So we're not going to use the forged letters because that's ahistorical.
There's also Acts, right, which is like kind of a biography about Paul's life.
We're going to get to that,
Okay.
inshallah. Yeah, that's a good point. So where do we want to start off about Paul of Tarsus, and why does he play such a significant role in Christianity? Do you want to start with Idris?
He was a Roman citizen.
Yep.
He was he a tent maker, it was said, I think, as well.
He was a bounty hunter.
Well, initially he was a tent maker.
Yeah.
As a profession. Supposedly, I think he was a Pharisee. There was a name of his teacher in terms of where he got Ijaza from, but I can't remember the name of his teacher.
Right.
He was in and around Palestine.
Yes.
But he's known as Paul of Tarsus because he was up in, was it Anatolia, if I remember rightly? Modern day southern
Turkey.
coast of Turkey.
Yeah.
And as you said, he was a Jewish zealot in the sense that he was a bounty hunter. He tracked down and killed Christians by the directive of the high priest, the high Pharisee priest.
Yes.
And supposedly that high priest sent him on a mission to Damascus. Mind you, the high priest had no authority in Damascus. That's the second point. That's a different point.
Okay.
But on his way to Damascus, there's 2 accounts. I think both in Acts, he saw a light, didn't hear anything. The other account is he heard something, didn't see a light. They were 2 witnesses, not named though. And Jesus revealed himself and made him his apostle. And then he had obviously a change in heart, and he started propagating Christianity. And I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Jay, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's really well summarized, mashallah. But one thing maybe that really stood out for me is the story of Paul and like the places he went to. So you mentioned Antioch and all these regions that are in like modern day Greece and Turkey now. And it's just interesting to me that the journey of Isa alayhi salam in the New Testament, he's visiting these poor fishing villages across the Sea of Galilee, these poor towns of Jews that are not, and when you look at these towns and what they would have been like in history at that time, they weren't towns that were Hellenized, and Hellenized being like
Greek culture.
Greek influenced. So these weren't
Yeah.
towns that were Greek influenced. And these were the towns, the poor fishing towns that he was visiting in a time where Greek influence and Hellenization was occurring in Palestine, where there was these big cities popping up, but yet Isa alayhi salam was visiting these small fishing villages. And to me, it sounds like Paul, he's going to a completely different audience, right? He's not going to these like poor fishing towns of Orthodox Jews that are trying to keep their community going in an environment where they're being Hellenized. He's actually going to the Hellenization headquarters. So that's something that just really
Right.
stood out to me.
Yeah.
I think that's indicative of him being a Roman citizen
Hmm.
and him being from Tarsus or Tarsus. That was his domain.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was his
And
domain.
you said he was Herodian, right? So
I
Herodian.
didn't say he was Herodian.
Oh,
no,
you
but-
sorry.
But there's that thought. Yeah.
There's the thought that he's Herodian, and Herodians are from King Herod, which were like the Jewish aristocracy that were basically puppets of the Romans. So it's like interesting. He's tied to the Jewish aristocracy,
The
who
bourgeois.
are puppets of the Romans.
Yeah, and it said that, and I always forget the author's name, the female scholar's name, the one who did the study on the literacy in Palestine at the time.
Oh, I forgot. Catherine something.
Oh, you forgot? Because I always come to you for the
yeah,
next.
I forget.
always forget
I
it.
forget. Yeah.
But it's thought, generally speaking, that, and this feeds into what Brother Tay was saying, that roughly about 5% maybe were literate in the Greek language.
I think it's less than that.
Yeah, that's a bit conservative, yeah.
97%
And
were illiterate.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
and those who were literate, and this is in the Greek predominantly, were as Brother Tay said, those who were in the major cities, and that was because of them liaising with the Roman government, taxes,
Yeah.
things like that they were required to learn. But beyond that, the vast majority were not literate and were very still.
Wow.
Were not Hellenized. But we're going to come on to that point as in terms of Northern Galilee and those areas where, generally speaking, I believe he didn't visit much, and that feeds into the Nazarenes and James, brother in Jesus, etc.,
Absolutely.
who are more
Senior.
more senior, but also more, for lack of a better word, more traditional in that sense.
Oh,
That they,
of course. I want to mention something.
yeah.
The most important thing to know about Paul is he never met Jesus.
Yeah, and
He was not
why
one of the 12 apostles.
and why he became Christian in the first place, right? So that'd be
Exactly.
good.
And why has he become such an influential figure that nearly half of the New Testament corpus are all Pauline theology? Why does he play such
I'm
a...
really sorry. Just it's in
No,
his,
no, it's fine. Go
It's
ahead.
in his right. I told you I'm going to interrupt you, but no. He says in his writings, he gives almost a hierarchy. He talks about Cephas, Peter.
Peter.
He then talks about the 12,
Yes.
I believe. Then he talks about the 500, which I think is in Acts, Luke somewhere. The 500.
Oh, the 500. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's right. That's right.
Then he mentions James, the brother of Jesus. No, then he mentions himself. No, then he mentions James, and then he mentions himself.
Right.
Right? So it's very interesting, we're going to get to this, how he puts James, the brother of Jesus, right at the end, just before him.
Right. Yes.
Even
I
the
remember.
500 before.
Mm.
Yeah? And that's about, in terms of what you were saying about him not meeting Jesus, and it being a miracle on the road of Damascus.
And what
I
was
apologise.
No worries.
and
Fine.
what was the Oh, sorry, were you going to mention?
No,
Yeah, because I
go.
rudely interrupted him. I think we should let him
Yeah.
finish.
Very, very quickly, yeah. So, what I find interesting is that the main message of Paul is diametrically opposite to the main message of the apostles of Jesus. The Acts of the Apostles, you said correctly that arguably the Acts of the Apostles predominantly talks about the life of Paul, and that's why biblical scholars do say that Acts, you could call it
Acts of Paul.
the Acts of Paul, because it is about Paul predominantly. Jerusalem disciples like Peter, James, John, those disciples, those apostles who lived with Jesus, who ate with Jesus, who learnt from Jesus, who was given the authority by Jesus. They were mentioned in a very minuscule level in the book of Acts. They're probably mentioned in the first 9 chapters, and then the rest of the chapters in Acts, it's all about Paul. And that's why biblical scholars say that whoever authored Acts authored the Gospel of Luke, because if you read Acts chapter 1 verse 1, he wrote for Theophilus, which it corresponds to Luke chapter 1 verse 1. Yeah.
Okay.
So whoever wrote Acts, or for the Gospel of Luke. Now we know that
But
anonymous.
The ending of Luke at some point is different. The ending of Luke was authored by someone different from the beginning of Luke, the first half.
That's correct.
So I know what you're saying, but some
So there
might
was a
get
redaction.
Yeah,
There
some
was a
might get the
redaction.
perception that it was fully one author,
Barakallahu feek, you're correct.
just to be, you know.
So they could be like, even the four Gospels, they went through redactions, especially the Gospel of John, like Raymond Brown in his commentary on the Gospel of John, it went through 5 redactions. So it's not surprising that when we look at the Gospel of Luke, as you said correctly, the beginning of Luke's Gospel seems to be one author, and then it ends in a different way, which indicates that there could be multiple.
It talks about
authorship.
we. So I
The
think,
we documents.
yeah.
Yes,
So the first,
yes.
we're kind of digressing now, but
Yeah.
the first part is first person, and it also, and then yeah.
But the reason why I like Tay bringing up about the Acts of the Apostles, because I think that plays a big part. What scholars mention is that the Acts of the Apostles, as you said correctly, should be renamed as Acts of Paul. It's a cover-up story. This is the exact phrase that the biblical scholars say. And later on, inshallah, we're going to demonstrate why Christian scholars say that the Acts of Paul is a cover-up story, and whoever authored the Acts of Paul wanted to make seem as though Paul and the Jerusalem disciples, like Peter and James, had harmony. But when we look at his first-hand letters of Paul, his own letters, it's completely opposite the way how he rebukes Peter. And we can go more into that, inshallah ta'ala. But
I think it might be worth touching on exactly. We talked about how Paul never met Jesus.
yes,
But what is the link that Paul is claiming to Jesus, and what is causing? Like we talked about, like there's this tension between the apostles and Paul. Like, what is the story of Paul, and like why are the disciples kind of like hesitant to accept him?
So very briefly, Paul is teaching something new.
Where did that originate from? So like,
That
what happened?
originates. I
Because
think
he was like going and persecuting Christians.
I
right?
think it originates from Paul's background, as we said, Hellenized, him being a Roman citizen
Yeah.
and being Hellenized, not meeting the historical Jesus, whilst potentially those disciples of Jesus in the New Testament met Jesus, learnt from him.
But I mean,
and-
like the journey to Damascus. If you could just elaborate on that a bit.
Oh.
The story where he kind of has the vision and.
So,
I think
okay.
you mentioned it earlier, but yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right. So with Paul of Tarsus, again, Tarsus is southern Greece and southern modern day Turkey.
Yeah.
It's believed, it said that he was a Roman citizen, that he was learned in Jewish law, and that he, for some reason, I don't know how, he became, basically he would track down and hunt down Christians
Yeah.
in terms of pure persecution.
Yeah.
And in terms of the road to Damascus, you're asking?
Yeah. So that's story.
Very simply, it says that he was sent by the high priest of the temple in Jerusalem to Damascus on a mission to hunt certain Christians. Now, the issue there is that the high priest didn't have any authority in Damascus. And also beyond that, the high priest wasn't like a pope. He didn't even have authority over the diaspora of the Jewish people. He only had authority in the temple and in the surrounding area. And any Jew who made pilgrimage to Jerusalem for burnt offerings.
Right.
You know? Right. So there wasn't that notion of like a pope or, say, a caliphate or anything like that. Right. So there wasn't a central place of power in terms of edicts and I don't know what the Jewish term is for fatwas or religious edicts or whatever like that. It wasn't like that, let alone authority in Damascus. So that's why some people dispute whether, why he was going to Damascus in the first place. Again, when he was going to Damascus, it's mentioned in Acts in 2 places, whereby one says that he heard something and he didn't see anything, and in the other account in Acts that he saw something but he didn't hear anything. Okay. So the notion, the type of interaction he had with Jesus, who was a spiritual Jesus, not the physical Jesus.
Yes, yeah.
Was
The heavenly Jesus.
Yeah, the heavenly. There was a bit of there is a contradiction there. Now it does state that there were 2 witnesses with him, but those witnesses are not named at all.
Yeah.
So they're
It's
anonymous.
unusual, right?
Yeah. And then beyond that, he was charged by Jesus to go and propagate the religion.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what then. That's how he converted. That's his story in terms of how he converted. Then that's found in Acts, and to be honest, I can't recall if anything. Yeah, I think it's one of his letters as well. Actually,
What,
potentially
about his, on the road to Damascus?
Yeah, I know it's in Acts for sure.
Corinthians.
Corinthians.
It's
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Perfect. So it's in his own, or what is
Yeah.
deemed as one of his authentic letters,
Yeah.
coupled with Acts of the Apostles as well. That's how his conversion happened. Okay, but he has baggage.
Okay.
Paul has baggage. Okay, so meaning Roman citizen, Hellenized, supposedly a student of the law, so he understands it. Okay, now the question. Now we're getting to, this can go many
friction.
ways, but we want to talk about the friction, don't
Yes.
we? Okay,
Yes.
so the friction is basically, in a nutshell, in certain aspects, Paul is teaching one thing, and Jesus' disciples are teaching another thing. Okay, and the friction, I think, a poignant situation of the friction is the Council of Jerusalem, when he visited Jerusalem. Whether he visited Jerusalem or not is disputed. Some say he may not even actually visited
No, I
Jerusalem.
think- I think
in
it's in
Acts
Galatians.
it says he went, right? Or
Well, he said, if you remember what Raihan said
yeah.
about Acts of the Apostles,
it's not
it's,
trustworthy,
it's a
but
cover-up story.
thank
yeah,
you.
yeah, but
So some scholars
according to
actually,
the standard
no, that's
story,
all right.
yeah.
Some scholars actually even potentially dispute Acts of the Apostles is and Paul's writings, okay, which then also feeds on the full
Yeah.
gospel, the canonical
Yeah.
gospels.
Yes.
They all work in synergy,
Right.
right? We have a potential first, second Peter. Definitely second Peter, scholars say, and I'll explain what I'm talking about. Secondly, scholars say second Peter is not written by Peter.
Absolutely.
Some dispute whether first Peter was written by Peter. You've got the book of the letter of James. Again, that's disputed whether actually James didn't write it. Okay, but what they do say, the letter or the book of James in the New Testament still carries that Jameson, Yaakov kind of theology.
Yeah.
Yes, even though it was written by him,
Correct.
the theology, generally speaking, is
it
found
fits
in
with
there.
what he wants.
My point is this, is as Brother Raihan was talking about. When you look at the letters of Paul and Acts of the Apostles, including the Gospels as well, it's very Pauline. It's very Pauline in terms of his views
Correct.
and his theology. So what we need to do is to read between the lines
Yes.
and see what relationship did he have with the apostles of
Okay.
Jesus,
Yeah.
and what was their interactions.
Can I mention one
And
thing?
that's what we need to do. Yeah.
Can I mention one thing very quickly? Barakallahu Feek. It's also important to understand that the Acts of the Apostles is written in a third-hand account, and then you have Paul's letters, which are his first-hand accounts. Now we have the Council of Jerusalem spoken about in the Acts of the Apostles, in the book of Acts. Paul also spoke about his interaction with the Jerusalem disciples like James and Peter. Now, reasonably speaking, if I want to know, if I want to dissect the historical accuracy, exactly what happened, I would rather take the first-hand account of Paul than a third-hand account. Because here's the irony: when you read in Acts, yes, there was a friction, there was a disagreement between James, who was the head of the Jerusalem church, the half brother of Jesus apparently, okay, and Paul. Now the dispute was about, should the Gentiles observe the Mosaic law? Should they be circumcised? Okay, that was the disagreement.
And the Jews themselves.
And the Jews themselves.
Remember, Paul was.
See, that's
It said that Paul was telling Jews that if they embraced Christianity,
yeah.
they would no longer need to observe
But here's where the issue is. The Acts of the Apostle doesn't mention that.
Acts of the Apostles.
No, the Council of Jerusalem was solely about the
No, it does.
salvation.
I think we're gonna.
No. It's in Pauline letters. It's not in Acts. In Acts, it's about whether the Gentiles should observe the Mosaic law about circumcision.
Yeah.
So what James he said, look, we are only sent to the Israelites, yeah, because Jesus gave us a mission that we have to spread his gospel, but only to the Israelites, because the message was only for the Israelites. Like Jesus says in Matthew 15:24, I have not been sent but unto the lost in the house of Israel. And if we see the history of the apostles' activity, they never ever evangelized the Gentiles, but they were evangelizing the Israelites. So James was saying to Paul that, look, we have no problem. If you want to evangelize the Gentiles, accepting Christ, we have no problem with that. So for the Gentiles, they don't need to follow the Mosaic law. They don't need to be circumcised. However, they have to uphold Noahide laws. Yeah. So Noahide laws are like the 7 laws. You know, do not commit adultery, do not commit idolatry, etc. Yeah. So that's where James the Just came to terms with Paul. He said, look, you are sent to the Gentiles, go and evangelize the gospel, but they don't have to follow the Mosaic law, but we have to follow the Mosaic law because we're the Israelites. Okay, so this is from Acts. So there seems to be a little bit of friction.
That's what I was sorry, bro. Just to add, even in Acts, that's what I was trying to say. Like even in Acts, like the pro-Pauline document is still emphasizing there's a tension there. So the tension exists no matter what, right?
So there was that.
So even in the worst case scenario, even like in the case where Paul is trying to make himself look as good as possible, on that side, they still acknowledge there's a tension.
I apologize. I take it back. You're absolutely correct. the first one of the disputes about the Council of Jerusalem was that James was telling to Paul that we heard things about you that you're going around telling the Israelites that they don't have to follow the Mosaic law. They just have to believe in salvation lies in the faith of Jesus Christ, the death and resurrection. So take your Nazarite vow to prove that you didn't go around saying this.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, and this is what James Tavel mentioned in his book, Paul and Jesus, is that he takes the Nazarite vow, but he never confessed.
No, he doesn't.
Do you see?
He doesn't.
And then Paul goes on in his own letter. He says, "When I'm with the Jew, I'm under the Jew, and when I'm with the Gentiles, I'm under the Gentiles."
So he carried on preaching.
So he carried on preaching, and this is where Paul, if you go to his first letter, first-hand account, So the Acts of the book of Acts tries to make it look like, oh, there was an initial disagreement between James, the Jerusalem church, and Paul, but they had no problem with Paul. Paul can evangelize with the Gentiles. Okay, but what they didn't know is what Paul was doing after the Council of Jerusalem. That's what they didn't know.
I think they did.
The Jerusalem church didn't know about it.
I think they did. I'll tell you why.
Okay, go on.
There's I think it's in Galatians and Corinthians, probably one. So I think potentially, okay. I think after this interaction, potentially, and I need to look at the timelines and whether when the Council of Jerusalem happened, because he goes on to write to the Corinthians and potentially Galatians as well, to tell them to follow his gospel and not their so-called gospel.
Yeah.
And he goes on to call them super apostles or so-called apostles.
No, I agree with you, but were the Jerusalem church,
because
were they aware of Paul's gospel?
Yes, because it also says in his writings, what's deemed authentic, that they then sent messengers
to check up on him.
To check up, not on him, to go to the churches that he was preaching to with letters, as in the Council of Jerusalem. James gave a letter to Paul, to Peter, to another Judas, to Simeon, and he sent them to the church in Antioch with a letter as proof of the new way to in terms of what is required of the Gentiles. That they don't have to be circumcised, but they have to abide by certain other laws. In the same way, that's why Paul rebukes them and tells them, believe in my gospel, not in their gospel. And that's why he talks about them in a derogatory way, because the church in Jerusalem that James led were sending messengers after Paul with letters.
I agree.
And then this feeds into something else beyond just the law, just the law which you're aware of. That's why in some exegesis it talks about that. I think it's in Corinthians, whereby Paul says, Paul is basically. I need to get the quote. Paul is basically reinforcing the fact of the crucifixion actually taking place. Why is he arguing to the churches that he's preaching that the crucifixion actually, Galatians, actually took place? Because it's believed, those messengers that James was sending were preaching the opposite.
And what were they preaching?
That the crucifixion did not take place. That's why he's reinforcing.
What's the evidence for that?
I need to go into detail.
Okay.
About this. But that's what's been argued. Secondly,
I remember in the NIV Study Bible, it does give a hint that the disciples, it could be possible that the disciples of Jesus didn't believe in the crucifixion.
1 Corinthians 11, chapter 11 onwards.
Yeah.
Okay, and this again, this all goes back to F.C. Bauer, James D. Table as well, believes in this hypothesis and a few others. Okay, so what I'm getting at is the friction is not only on should Jews follow the law and should Gentiles who convert to Christianity follow the law, what aspect of the law. There's also Paul, like when Paul goes to Jerusalem, in the Council of Jerusalem, he says, I'm not going because of their authority, I'm going under because of my own volition and revelation.
And I've got nothing to do with them.
Exactly. So even before he gets there, he's got hostility. After going there and coming back, he's still got hostility. They're also sending James and the Council, the Church of Jerusalem, after are also saying. Do you get my point now?
Sorry, I just wanted to add just a quick thing on there. So you're mentioning that before there was hostility, after there was hostility.
Yeah.
So the Ebionites, they actually rejected Paul, right?
Yes. They called him an apostate.
They called him an apostate.
Absolutely.
And the reason the Ebionites rejected Paul around the Council of Jerusalem and this whole saga, they still rejected him, is because they believe that he just completely denies the Old Testament laws. So they believed that when he was coming in to the Council of Jerusalem to basically apologize, they believe he's like, if he doesn't even care about the Nazirite vow is a Jewish traditional thing.
Exactly.
It's like based off the Old Testament. It's part of that whole corpus. So to the Ebionites, like if they think Paul just completely disregards like the Jewish tradition and the Old Testament, why does he not do the same to the Nazirite vow? Why does he feel like it holds any authority?
Very strong point.
Very strong point.
To the Ebionites, they just thought like Paul is coming in and doing this, apology in the Council of Jerusalem just for show, because he doesn't even believe it's like he doesn't believe in the Nazirite vow. He just thinks it's all a joke. So to him, to go there and to do this, to like pretend to be under James, that's just all a show, because to him a Nazirite vow doesn't mean anything. So that's why the Ebionites rejected Paul prior to there and after there. Just wanted to add that.
That's amazing. And also just another thing to add, Barakallahu, you're absolutely correct. The disciples did knew about Paul's hostility towards them, and that the fact that his gospel diametrically opposes the gospel that they were preaching, the Jerusalem disciples. James Tabor, he mentioned in his book that this happened around 55 AD, and it happened that from the letters of Paul, I forgot which one of the letters, but it's one of the authentic letters of Paul, that Paul saw Peter sharing the table with the Gentiles. And as soon as, and this is how Paul describes the circumcised group, and the leader was James. And as soon as Peter saw James, Peter went to the other side. So he separated himself from the Gentile. And then on that basis, Paul called out on Peter's hypocrisy. Yeah. Now, what does that show you? It shows you that, when the Catholics say that Peter is he's the founder of the church and he's the leader.
Yes.
In reality, this doesn't indicate that Peter is the highest authority, because he actually saw James as the highest authority. Yeah, and this is why, according to Eusebius from a 4th century, he mentions that if any dispute happens, anything, you go to James. In the Gospel of Thomas, which is an apocryphal gospel, Christians don't accept it, but in one of the 114 sayings of Jesus, Jesus says explicitly, after me, my successor is James.
Yes. And
Okay.
I think another church. Yeah, church father.
Hegesippus, he mentioned
Yeah.
it as well. Yeah, a Jewish Christian figure.
Yeah.
Now, this is very important because even Paul himself rebuked Peter's hypocrisy. Okay, we're talking about an apostle of Jesus who lived with Jesus, who ate with Jesus, who was given the authority by Jesus to spread the gospel. And here you are, Paul, never met Jesus in his ministry, self-appointed himself as an apostle. And by the way, I've made this point to many Christians in the park. Why did none of the 12 apostles regarded Paul as an apostle? Why is that? If Paul is such an influential figure, okay, and that he was a man of God, why didn't the apostles see him eye to eye? Why didn't they regarded Paul as an apostle? Okay, and in Acts chapter 9 verse 26, the disciples were afraid of him. Why were they afraid of him? Because he's a stranger. Yeah, Gharib. He's a stranger.
But
Like, who are you?
You're not just afraid of people who are strangers. You're afraid of strangers with some level of authority.
Exactly.
So he must have had some authority.
So
there.
you're having Paul,
Yeah.
who rebukes Peter's so-called hypocrisy, who gave Paul the authority to call out on Peter's hypocrisy. That belongs to James. It's not for Paul. Okay, so this really shows you, as Brother Idris said articulately, he articulated very well, mashallah, that Paul already had hostility with the apostles, with the Jerusalem disciples, and he describes as the so-called super apostles, so-called pillars of the church. Yeah, it's a derogatory remark, even though he acknowledges that they are in authority, but at the same time, Paul is saying, yeah, but I got nothing to do with them. I'm receiving this revelation from Jesus Christ. So definitely there was a tension that took place like in the mid-50s. Yeah,
And
very interesting. Do you want to add anything else, or
Just to reinforce that point that, I think it has to be people have to bear in mind that that when you're reading the New Testament, that Paul's writings, Luke, Acts, the other Gospels, they come, especially Paul's writings and Luke's and Acts, but especially other Gospels, we're primarily getting to a certain, there's a lot of influence from Paul in all of those writings.
Yes.
In a nutshell. I know we talked about Mark and then John, high Christology, and Matthew, more Jewish orientated, etc. But fundamentally, taking that into consideration, obviously, Paul's writings do permeate between all of those letters and books.
yes,
So, like I said, to kind of, you have to kind of read between the lines, and more than that, actually, you need to look at certain passages whereby, there were issues between them, and potentially, a lot of the issues were theological as well, and what can I say? Certain other original writings, if they did exist, no longer available. They may be found, who knows, in the future.
yeah,
But we just have what we have to play with. But really important as well,
Oh.
as certain church fathers, like you said, they do allude to the fact of James being appointed and James's successor, Simon. Am I right?
Simon, yes, Simon.
Simon. And don't forget Simon, because when James passed,
And it's meant to be Simon the Zealot according to Christian tradition.
not Simon Peter, Simon.
Simon
Zell.
Zealot.
yeah, he took over, and who killed Simon? It was
The Romans.
Wasn't it so the high priest died at
Yeah.
the time, and then whilst Rome was being told to then he appointed a new high priest who was
Right.
on his way to Jerusalem. There was a priest there who took the reins as high priest, almost
Oh.
like a coup.
Okay.
He killed Simon, supposedly. That he
Wow.
threw. Yeah, he killed Simon as well. I think that's how James died. Actually,
No,
And then-
James 62 AD.
that's how James died.
It's
That's how James died.
Yeah, sorry, I beg
no,
your
so-
pardon.
so
I got
there's a lot of
confused.
like
But there was Simon
yeah.
afterwards.
Simon the Zealot, supposedly, according to some Christians, after I got the thing. So it's like a lot of these apostles, and when they're being passed away, it's very suspicious, and there's conflicting like narratives about why they're passing away. And
Can I also mention one thing?
Yeah.
A lot. There were also reports by the Israelites that after the execution of James the Just by the high priest. So James died in 62 AD. Yeah. A lot of the Jewish authorities say that that's what led to the Jewish revolt, and they believe this was a divine punishment, because James the Just was known for his zeal for the Torah, observing the Torah. He was well respected. He was well reputed, and he's suppressed in the New Testament writings. Yeah.
And at that time, those, for lack of a better term, those Jewish Christians, okay, like James, they were still practicing their religion in the synagogues.
Correct.
There was still no disparity between them and other Jews. They potentially those Jews at the time saw it more of how can I put this, less of a theological difference, more of potentially, accepting who the Messiah was and the Messiah. But that difference between accepting potentially that Jesus was the Messiah or not, for many Jews who were not Jewish Christians, it wasn't enough for them to believe basically to chuck them out of the synagogues.
Right.
That happened at a later date.
Okay. That happened around 50s, isn't it? 50 AD?
No,
yeah. It was around the Jewish revolt. Started to change the.
Yeah, I've got it on my phone. I think it was in and around the death of James, but I'm sure it was after.
Okay, so around 60s. Then.
I think it was after, yeah. So what I'm trying to get at, I'm really sorry.
No, it's fine.
The point I'm trying to make is this: even up until that time, the Jameson Church was compatible with Judaism at the time, whilst Paul's church was not.
Correct. Can I
get my point?
I get. Can I
because of the yeah.
So it's very interesting. So it's interesting that James Tabo, he mentioned in his book, and I highly recommend viewers to read his book, because he specialized in Paul for 4 decades. So he specializes in studying Paul and his letters, and he wrote a book called Paul and Jesus: How the Apostle Transformed Christianity. And his objective, James Tabor, he says that the Christians are accustomed to read the New Testament according to the canon order. So it starts from Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, then it goes into the book of Acts, then it goes to James' letter, the letters of Paul, and then book of Revelation is the last. James Tabor says that if we were to go based on historicity of these books and when it was written, we should first start off with Paul's letters, because he's the earliest writer of the New Testament. Okay, so it's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. So a lot of Christians don't realize that it was Paul, all of Paul's letters that was written prior to the canonical Gospels. So scholars mention that Paul's letters was written between 50 to 57 AD, and the earliest Gospel is Mark, that was written around 70 CE. So actually Paul's letters is the earliest. So we should start off with Pauline letters. Okay?
And further proof to that is, how many times does Paul quote the Gospels?
Very hardly.
Hardly. And even in the quotes where there is, supposedly he does quote the Gospels.
Yes.
That can be attributed to stories that are being narrated in that region anyway.
Exactly.
So it's not like he's quoting the Gospels verbatim all the time. It's just further proof that the Gospels were written after Paul's writings.
Absolutely. And the objective of James Tabor is to first start off with Paul's letters, and then we can decipher from Paul's letters what version of Christianity is he against. And the academics call Jewish Christianity. So they were like the Jerusalem church, like James the Just, Peter, James, the 12 apostles. They were Jerusalem disciples who didn't believe that Jesus was God, Son of God. They didn't believe that Jesus was sacrificed for their sins, which is called vicarious atonement. But they considered Jesus to be a human Messiah. They considered Jesus to be a prophet of God, a servant of God. Yeah, and it's very surprising. Not many Christians know this. Paul is the earliest source for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. A man who never met Jesus in his lifetime, a man who never met any of the apostles of Jesus, but is somehow he's the earliest source for the resurrection of Jesus, which around 2 decades after the supposed resurrection of Jesus. And I want to mention something very quickly. Not many Christians know that the Pauline version of the resurrection of Jesus, it comes across a spiritual resurrection, he's encountering
Not
a
a
vision,
physical, like flesh.
not a physical
Yeah.
flesh. So somebody said, I think somebody said like Casper the ghost. Okay, like it's a nice analogy. That's what Paul is describing when he says Jesus was resurrected, and what he saw, it's like Casper the ghost. It's a spiritual
You can put your
resurrection.
hand through it, and yeah.
Now, what's interesting, Mark and Matthew, the first two gospels, it comes across as though it was a spiritual resurrection. But then all of a sudden, when you read Luke and John, it's portrayed as a physical resurrection. So, for example, in Luke chapter 24, verse 36, when Jesus came to the upper room after the supposed resurrection, the disciples of Jesus were shocked. And Jesus like, how do you men see? For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see me have. So Jesus said, do you have any food? So the disciples gave him broiled fish and honeycomb, and he ate in front of them. Now that's very interesting, because the first two Gospels, Matthew and Mark, doesn't portray a physical resurrection of Jesus. But Luke and John, all of a sudden, shifts to the physical resurrection of Jesus. Now the scholars, they mention, why did this happen? The reason is because if you have a crucified Messiah, it's a failed Messiah. According to the Jewish law, how many Messiah got crucified?
So many.
Many.
Yeah.
There were many Messiahs who got crucified, who got executed, but they
And
considered to be
crucifixion was also a punishment for rebellion against the state.
Exactly,
It wasn't-
insurrection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
insurrection.
Yeah. So, but for those who truly believe that Jesus was the Messiah, a crucified Messiah is a failed Messiah. So they had to concoct a story of resurrection from a spiritual resurrection, just a visionary experience, to a physical resurrection, to prove that he was the actual Messiah. Yeah. And so it's interesting how Paul has a different version of resurrection, like watching Casper the Ghost. Okay, and he says, just like the disciples see Jesus. So meaning that when we see the Gospels of Luke and John, that apparently the disciples of Jesus spent with Jesus 50 days after the resurrection. Well, according to Paul, that's not what Paul believed. Paul believed that he had the same experience as the disciples. So the disciples saw a heavenly vision, a visionary experience, not a physical resurrection. So we know that this was a later development to make it into a physical resurrection. And very quickly, Origen. Origen is one of the most famous
Church writers.
church writers. I don't think he's a church father, but he's a church writer, right? He even didn't believe in the physical resurrection.
Oh, yeah.
It's a spiritual resurrection. So what Paul describes a resurrection, a resurrected Jesus, is completely different to how the Gospels portray. So which one is right?
Yeah. So a lot to think about there.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about. That's what James Tabble mentioned. That according to Paul, it was a spiritual resurrection, but according to Luke and John, it's a physical resurrection. And the reason why they had to portray Jesus as a physical resurrected body is because if you have a crucified Messiah, then he failed his mission. So in order to make him a true Messiah, they had to concoct that he actually physically resurrected. But according to the Jews, some of the Jews didn't believe in the separation between the body and the soul. So technically it wasn't resurrection, it was resuscitation. So yeah, it's very complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and like from what I'm hearing about all this, like this guy, Paul. So he was like it seems to me when you're looking into the research, it's like he's sort of Roman aligned, right?
Yeah.
And he's killing early Christians, and then the reason he must be killing these early Christians is because these Torah observant Christians are a threat to the Roman Empire,
Right.
of which he's a citizen. And then he suddenly has like a vision, and this like not even a physical, tangible vision, an actual like spiritual vision, right? Like with spirit. And then he suddenly starts to claim like he switches from being a person who really hates Torah observant Christians, whilst being a Torah light Jew in a way.
Right.
He switches to being a Torah light Christian. So is he really shifting in his purpose? Because his original enemy was Torah observant Christians.
Yeah.
And now he's just infiltrated that movement.
Thank you.
And then when he's infiltrated the movement, he's still doing the same thing. He's just trying to shift them from being Torah observant to become Torah light.
Yeah,
For lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, and I don't want to offend Christians because of this is part of their core belief. So I know for some Christians who might be listening to this, it could be quite damning, or not damning. Sorry, quite potential disturbing. Yeah, because it's the core foundational belief. So there's and I put this in the group. There was a scholar called Spinoza.
Oh, Spinoza, yeah.
Yeah. So he did some work on this about four in the 1600s, and this is in line with what you were talking about. So what he talks about is he believes that Paul's views on authority was in line with the governing authorities, i.e. Rome. And what he says is by emphasizing obedience to the Roman Empire, Spinoza believes Paul sought to present Christianity as a religion compatible with and not a threat to the existing political order.
Right.
And there's certain passages, what is unto Caesar's is Caesar's.
Oh yeah, Romans, yeah.
Romans and paying tax and whatnot. Even to the fact in I think it's Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, where there's a long list of addressing fathers and mothers and certain other things, but it goes on to address slaves and said slaves continue to be slaves and obey your master as you obey Christ, etc. So what he's trying to do is keep the current social and political order, and allowing them to continue to work within that framework.
And he's saying it's sanctioned by God to obey this this empire.
Yes, civil duty to the empire.
Like he's saying, it's like a sanctioned by God to obey this empire that's been persecuting the Jews.
Correct.
Yes, it's theological.
Theological, like
Totally
it's
theological.
part of the
Revelation.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, Barakallahu Feekum. Another point I want to make about Paul, just very quickly, is that the core message that Paul preached, like his gospel, is that salvation lies in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And that your salvation doesn't predicate on upholding the laws. Yeah. But James, on the other hand, like as you said earlier on, like we don't know who really wrote James. It wasn't really James, but whoever wrote James is representing Jamesonian theology. He says, with faith comes with works.
And without that? And without that?
And without that?
Basically, there is no salvation without faith and work.
So they come together.
Yeah. So without that, you're dead, like spiritually dead.
And I remember Robert Eisenman. Robert Eisenman is one of the most popular scholar. He specialized in Dead Sea Scrolls. And he mentioned that if you read the letter of James, it's very, it's synonymous to the Islamic teaching. Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repetitively says, Inna ladhina amanu wa aminu salihati. Yes, so Allah always pairs up those who believe and does righteous deeds. So meaning that your faith should be manifested through your righteous good deeds. Yeah, and that was the Jamesonian teaching. So really, that's what the early Jerusalem church were upon. So it's a proto-Islam. Yeah, that they were still upholding the Sabbath. They were still carrying on worshipping the one God of Israel. They abstained from consuming pork, and Jesus was upon that as well. Yeah. Whereas Paul, on the other hand, his main core message is, the law is cursed. I would be like this. Is what he says. He said the Mosaic law is cursed, and Christ died. Christ became a curse for you, and he quotes from Deuteronomy chapter 21 verse 22 that curse is anyone who's hanged on the cross, and on a pole, on a tree.
Yeah.
So Paul is, as you said correctly, he was an anti-Torah observant, okay, which therefore, that's why the Ibnites and the Jerusalem church rejected Paul.
The Nazarenes.
The Nazarenes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Like, look how much tension he's having within the Jewish community. Like, where are his friends? And
That's a good point.
And when you look in Philippians 4, verse 22, it says, this is him talking, all God's people here send you greetings, especially those who belong to Caesar's household.
Wow.
So he doesn't have issues making friends with Caesar's household,
Wow.
but he has issues with the disciples of Isa alayhi salam.
So in Jerusalem, if you remember, in Jerusalem, that's a good point, Achite.
It's a very good point.
So in Jerusalem, I think this is after the Council of Jerusalem, there was word that he was in town, and a mob went to attack him because they heard he was telling Jews not to abide by the law.
That's in Acts.
And and Jews who are converting to Christianity, so these Christian Jews,
Judaizers.
and it was Roman soldiers who saved him, and I believe that's also when he said he's a Roman citizen.
To get out of that situation.
Yeah, so he was. There was not only friction between himself and the disciples, but also with others in that region. So, does anyone want to close?
I just wanted to just mention one thing from Flavius Josephus, because Christians like to mention him a lot. Sure. And this is actually from one of his works, the Works of Flavius Josephus, translated by William Whiston. A.M. Auburn and Buffalo. It's quite a long passage, but I think it's quite interesting, and I wanted to get you guys' opinions.
Go ahead.
If we got time, or
Yeah.
so it's quite a long passage. About this, and this is from 2:11. About this time, it was that King Agrippa built Caesarea Philippi, larger than it was before, in honor of Nero. Blah blah blah. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to get to the key bit.
No worries.
Okay, so here, but Ananias was too hard for the rest by his riches, which enabled him to gain those that were most ready to receive. Costobarus also and Saulus did themselves get together a multitude of wicked wretches, and this because they were of the royal family. So they obtained favor among them because of their kindred in Agrippa. But they used violence with the people and were very ready to plunder those who were weaker than themselves. And from that time it principally came to pass that our city was greatly disordered, and that all things grew worse and worse among us. So there's this figure here that Flavius Josephus is talking about, called Saulus, and Saulus of Agrippa, and he's been causing chaos throughout the empire and in the regions that he was in. I'm just trying to find. Have you heard of this figure before, like Saulus?
Remember you telling? I've heard you say this.
I've heard of Agrippa. I've heard of.
Yeah, and so this is a Saulus that's mentioned by Josephus, right? And he was an agent that, in the context of this passage.
Oh, he was a Roman puppet. Yeah.
So this is in the context of Josephus writing about this figure called Saulus,
Right.
who was an agent that came to Jerusalem to divide the Jews. He caused disturbances within the temple. So it's very interesting that this is happening.
Interesting, yeah.
It's just a lot of like parallels.
Maybe that's something to look into. Definitely.
So, yeah. I mean, it kind of ties in with what you were saying about like Paul being a subversive Roman agent, right? That's something that you believe in.
Wow.
So.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Very.
Jazakallah
Quite
brothers.
profound.
I think we should come to a conclusion.
Sure.
Inshallah. I just want to make a very quick point. It's very, I think for the Christians, when they say that we preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, I think that they're definitely preaching the gospel of Paul and not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because if you read the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which biblical historians say that John's gospel cannot be taken as a historical gospel, but Mark, Matthew, and Luke, what was the gospel of Jesus? The gospel of Jesus is actually based upon Islam, which is repent, for the kingdom of God is yours.
That's Mark.
That's Mark. That's in Mark. In Matthew and the greatest commandment, many Christians, look, we're at Speaker's Corner for years, and we ask basic questions to the Christians. According to Jesus Christ, what is the greatest commandment? And they get it wrong. 9 out of 10. Actually, I'm being charitable. 99.99% of Christians get the wrong answer. They
And
say,
those are the ones that are coming to Speaker's
The
Corner.
end bit, not the first bit.
they quote the end bit,
And
or
they're,
they say
and they're
love the
coming.
neighbor.
Those are the ones that are coming to profess their faith. And
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not the ones that are the laymen.
Exactly. And so they get the answer wrong. And I'm
So what is
thinking,
the answer?
The answer is Shema Yisraelu Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Yeah. So Jesus was confirming the Torah. That was the greatest commandment given to Moses, and Moses preached to the Israelites that your God is only one. He has no partners. You shall have no other gods besides him. Okay? There's no graven images of him. Jesus also says to be better than the Pharisees and the scribes in the righteousness, you have to uphold each and every commandment in letter and spirit. In Matthew chapter 5 verse 17-20. So Jesus was a Torah observant Jew, according to the Gospels. He's telling you, worship one God alone. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Worship him and
So I want to ask you
do
a
good
question on that.
works. Yes, and that's Islam.
No, go ahead.
Oh no, I thought you were wrapping up, so I wanted to just quote a few of the passages about that Paul mentions in the New Testament to just show the character, because you're mentioning the message of Isa alayhi salam and the truthfulness of that message and the purity of that message throughout history.
Yes.
And this just shows the opposing spirit of Paul, where this is like quoting his words in the New Testament, 2 Corinthians 11:8. I've robbed other churches by receiving support from them, so to serve you. So this is a supposed man of God who's robbing churches of support, which outlines what we discussed earlier.
I think
That
you're talking about the Church of Macedonia.
okay, but yeah, it outlines earlier that like he's not preaching the same message as the churches that we were alluding to. This is 1 Corinthians 9-29, and then verse 20. To the Jews I become like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I become like one under the law, so as to win those under the law. So
amazing.
Just like really reflect on these statements. Is this like the spirit of Isa alayhi salam, if Jesus? And then the following passage. To those not having the law... Okay, that's just the same one. But yeah. Actually, here's the following passage. To those not having the law, I become like those not having the law.
Yes.
So as to win those not having the law. So it's not just about like winning Jews and this, that, the other. He's just playing games basically according to his words to just win people and rob from the authentic churches that seem to be preaching a more true message to his kind of to his situation. So yeah, it's very interesting. Like just when the brother was outlining the Isa alayhi salam's message, and then this just seems diametrically opposed for me to what he was preaching. I'm sorry, brother, you wanted to comment?
It's all right. Just one last point before we close. Was Jesus a Jew?
Okay, so if you say Jew in the sense of ethnicity, yes. Yeah.
In the broader sense that all the tribes were then called Jew under Judea?
Yes.
But okay.
Yeah, but in terms of his way of life, religion is al-Islam, because al-Islam means submission to the will of Allah alone, the creator of heavens and
So
the
is
earth.
he from
without
Bani
partners.
Israel?
No, he's not an Israelite.
Yeah.
He's not an Israelite, but he's from the... But he obviously Maryam, peace be upon her, is... So the tribal identity comes from the father.
Yes.
So not from the mother. So meaning Isa alayhi salam didn't have a biological father, right?
Yes.
So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gives that distinction between when Moses was addressing the Israelites, he said, Ya qawmi, my nation, my people, in Surah As-Saf, Surah 61.
That's my point.
And then when it comes to Jesus, he said, Ya Bani Israel, O children of Israel.
That's my point.
Yeah.
So therefore, was he a Yehudi?
Yehudi in the sense of in the sense of
So ethnically, was he?
Ethnically, yes, he was.
Okay.
Yes, ethnically, but obviously not as a religion, of course.
Okay.
Religion
and it's also important to note that Judaism has evolved a lot since that time period. So what we think of as like Judaism as the religion wasn't the religion of that time in a lot of ways.
Okay, so the qaida for them, the normative stance for them, for the Jewish people, is from a tribal aspect, you inherit it from your father.
Yes.
Okay, so obviously Jesus alayhi salam didn't have a father.
No, he didn't have a father.
Okay, so he's not Jewish or bin Israel in the sense of lineage.
No.
Okay, so what does he inherit from his mother, Miriam?
So what? Okay, so what he inherited from Maryam is that
From lineage.
from lineage, but
Did he inherit anything from lineage from her?
yeah, of course,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. What was that?
There's no tribal identity.
So
But,
there's no, yeah. Okay.
but Jewishness meaning that he lived amongst he lived amongst the Jewish tribes, and at that time,
Yeah.
there's no distinction anymore. So you could call someone a Jew,
I know,
but
that's
not
what I meant.
not necessarily from the tribe of Judah.
No, that's what I
but
meant.
all of the 12 tribes.
Yeah, I said that at that time.
Yeah.
The term Jew.
Yeah.
Potentially, initially it was only
was
only
diluted.
denote. Yeah, it would only denote the specific tribe of Judah.
Yeah.
But at that point, it came to encompass
Yes.
what was the king, anyone from the kingdom of Judah and anyone from the northern tribes
Yes,
of
correct,
Israel,
correct.
and encompass all of the
Correct.
tribes that were still known at that
Because
time.
after the Assyrian exile,
Yeah.
when the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians, then the 10 tribes had to integrate with the tribe of Judah,
Judah,
and then they had to use the term Jew interchangeably.
Okay.
Yeah, but Jewishness is
I
not.
just wanted you to confirm
Oh,
that,
confirm that. Okay.
because some people might have a
Barakallahu
misconception when
fikum.
you
I
say
agree.
a Jew.
Barakallahu fikum.
Just a-
In the sense of a geographical context, Jesus was a Jew, but in terms of his deen, is Deen al-Islam. Yeah, that he preached and he commanded and he submitted to Allah alone, the creator heavens and the earth, who alone deserves to be worshipped, and he has no partners, no equals.
And he's
That
not
is
said,
the-
which I know as well, he never said, Ya Qawmi, my people,
No.
when he was preaching. He would always, as a, being an
Ya Bani
outsider, would
Israel.
say, Oh people,
Yes.
oh children of Israel.
And,
So
and that distinguished him.
Like for
from the other
example, yeah,
prophets.
I'm like I think actually very quickly. Like for example, Hindu was used for geographical location at one point,
Yeah,
meaning those who
Hindustan.
live in the Indus Valley.
Hindustan.
Yeah, so you could actually call yourself a Hindu in a geographical context,
You still can Hindustani.
Hindustani, right?
Yeah.
But you're a Muslim. It's similar to that.
Understand.
Understood. But
Thank you for
I agree with that. No
for
problem, bro. Alhamdulillah.
clarifying. Okay, Assalamu alaikum, barakallahu fikum. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Please, any suggestions, use the comment section. Any suggestions in terms of topics you would like us to address,
Yes.
please let us know in the comment section. And Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.